Hi, welcome to my panelists. Privileged to be part of this panel. I think the moderator's job is very easy here given the star lineup that we've got. But lots of thought-provoking questions. At least I'm left with lots of questions after the previous panel, where you had a lot of deep, both superficial as well as deep insight on what's working, what's not working, where are the, what are the huge gaps we have in even understanding how this platform economy is working or the digital platforms work. And even before we try to understand how can we improve getting women onto it, like what does that platform look like, right? And how is it gendered? Is it just a digital platform? And to answer and take on some of these questions, I've got this great panel here. So with that, let me hand it off to Gayathri.
First, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Let me just put forward some of the questions which are there. First, let me say what my experience is, and from there I will derive it. So the experience has been in the interface with the platforms and to understand how platforms function from a work perspective. So when we look at the platforms itself, what are we referring to as platform is where the customer and the worker are able to find each other fairly easily in whatever, whether it's a product or a service. And that's where we're saying there is an abnormal amount of, what should I say, information. Where there is asymmetry, you start getting information in an available, consumable form. I think that's really what platform is. And from the previous panel, very interestingly, what is very, very clear is there has always been gig workers. There has always been unorganized workers. So outsourced work, unorganized work is not the defining factor, but it is the the interlay which the platform performs. Now let's come to who benefits from it, right? So at this point of time, and I'm being cautious here, is mostly platforms have been very, very good in the urban areas. As yet, the reach in the rural areas is still limited there. And if we say there has been reach, it is actually not so much the platform as much as the logistics or problem that platforms have solved. That means if they have to reach an agricultural good, an FMCD good, so they have been able to reach the consumer, who could be a farmer, who could be a woman. For example, if they're using the Nykaa, there could be women use products that are there. If it's a Kirana shop, they could be using Nykaa as a platform. Or if it's farmers, pesticides, fertilizers, equipment, etc., etc. there. So I think these are the two fundamental areas which are there. There are a lot of educational platforms which have come, which are basically digital learning. And that has been, in my opinion, there have been a lot. I'm not going into the right or wrong, but fundamentally the tuition industry, which has always been very, very vibrant in India, the private school tuition industry, preparation for competitive exams, one way or the other is the market that it is disrupting. Now if we were to bring this back to the worker, what does it mean for a male worker? What does it mean for a woman worker? The platform by definition doesn't distinguish, right? It just says, listen, I am who I am. You interact and you are able to either get or you don't get. Now, this to me itself is a bit, this is because it's the consumer determining market behavior. And we've seen when consumers determine market behavior, they want the best for themselves. And in this room, all of us are consumers. So as consumers, we don't really have a hat that we play or we bat towards a gender or the other, whether, irrespective of whether you're talking of the female gender, transgenders, we're not distinguishing. We just want a service to be delivered, product or service to be delivered. So I think that is where there is a challenge. Now, for a platform, what does it take to bring women onto the platform? Now, when we're talking about it, normally it is services that one is referring to, right? So when you're referring to services that one wants to bring to the platform, in my opinion, they need an incentive. It can be like you have in manufacturing, you have, the PLI schemes. You have several ones which is where capital, to get capital, you get incentivized. Assuming we are saying if women are in labor force, GDP will benefit, the most logical thing in my mind at least is, why not give the financial incentives for private companies which are actually running platforms to benefit? Because only money will incentivize somebody. Consumers, in my mind, cannot be the people who will do it, because you'll do good for some time, but your third minute it's your service which is going to happen. You're not, as consumers, we will not be the people who are there. So which means there are financial incentives which have to work to ensure that women come into the labor force at scale. uh, that I think is the only way in which platforms will actually disrupt the market for women. And it's possible. That is the reason I'm again and again referring to this. And let me explain to you what I mean. For example, if it is a food delivery platform, the food delivery platforms have openly said that if they have to hire women, it is 10 times the sourcing cost for them. 10 times. And I'm just quoting public data. I'm not referring to anything which is not in the public domain. So if it is 10 times, there is nobody who will humanly say, as a private limited company, that I'm going to spend so much because I really want to be a gender fair organization. It's not going to happen. So therefore, it is financial incentives. The second is, the job role in which women will come will not be actually the job role which we are thinking the platform will be. They will come in the back end in that case, right? It will be, for example, referring again to this example, they will be in warehouses, they will be there. But there again, that mimics not platform, it mimics actually manufacturing. So if it mimics manufacturing, there are other issues there which I will not go into now. Now, having said this, then is there a play for women in the platform economy? I think that's the question one needs to answer. The answer is yes, but I think we are sort of looking at the wrong end of the pole. Of course, skilling is important, and I say this because that's also my karma, dharma, bhumi, plus everything that has gone wrong with it. So therefore, I need to. For me, that is very, very important as an organizational, putting my organizational hat. But if I take off my organizational hat, I think it's not. It is not the skilling is a byproduct, right? We will do whatever it takes to earn money. So that's a byproduct. But what is absolutely important is, who is getting an inordinate financial advantage employing women? Somebody has to press that button. Is it GST? Is it PLI schemes? Is it something else which is there? That is what one would feel will be important. And I'll make one last point and stop. Platforms where products are where there's a marketplace being created, can women benefit there? Because can they make it at home? But there is a complexity there. There, by definition, if you have to go on to platforms, they actually audit. So if you audit the place where manufacturing has to happen for any product, in that case, again, it moves towards more formalized. It's possible, but it moves towards formalized. In that case, one needs to look at it from a different perspective. Do our rural areas, do our peri-urban areas, do our urban slums have the kind of infrastructure which will clear platforms' requirement for these women to produce close to home? I'm not even saying home, because they need to be close to home. I think that's the disruption which is required there. So in both cases, it's capital, and capital. Capital as financial incentives, so that, and in my mind, it's tax breaks. Why does a company go to Baddi, or why does a company go to Assam? Is because of tax breaks. Why are IT companies here? Because of tax breaks. SEZs are here because of tax breaks. If there are tax breaks given there, I think put gender in the midst of the tax break. Unless we are in the financial game, I don't think women are going to come in full force there. The second capital is infrastructure. So are we going to, so if we're saying that, product markets are important for women, that means, are we going to create the infrastructure? And we can't always say, listen, self-help groups are going to do it. I mean, uh, self-help groups to me is for empowerment. It's for just the space for one to talk. Skill programs are for empowerment, just for one place for one to talk. But that it does not mean financial empowerment. Financial empowerment requires investment, the capital again. So let me stop there.
So we're off to a pretty explosive start. Any quick, I'll take one or two questions if people want clarification or just feel inspired.
I'm Prakash from OMI Foundation. You mentioned about the 10 times high cost for hiring women. If you could sort of expand to that a little bit, like what could be the reasons for the difference in the hiring?
So I like this. I'm going to, as I said, it's in public domain. So I'm just going to quote the study. So Zomato tried to bring women into workforce. So when Zomato tried to bring women into workforce, they actually went to a lot of government self-help organizations, not for profits, and looked at hiring. So when they looked at hiring, they found that if there were 40 women who they were able to register, the person who showed up at work was one, for several reasons, right? People had to go to homes, and mobility even was not the reason, because they said that they will give it in the neighborhood, that they will not move beyond the 3-kilometer neighborhood. I'm not referring to the snags which happen at the platform level. Let's park that for a minute. There were issues there, but more importantly, the question was, how are you going to go to different houses? Are you going to go at what hours? These were all disincentives which actually meant women weren't coming in. Now, I'll give you another example. There's a very good, in my opinion, a company called Even Cargo, which we ourselves looked at working with. Okay, so Even Cargo fundamentally looks at giving women to FMCD and FMCG as well as food delivery platforms. So when this is done again, we really struggled with the sourcing of women for this, because here the issue were on twofold. We found one was access to bikes. How many of them have access to EV vehicles, simple bikes, etc. were fewer, where we don't need a driving license. I'm not bringing the driving license complexity. Now your company, which is your end company, which is your Swiggy or your Amazon or your Flipkart, is going to pay you the same rate. It doesn't matter whether you do men or women, it's going to pay you the same rate. But you have an higher what you call cost of acquisition is far higher for women than men. Then everybody gets disincentivized there. I think that's where I was coming from.
Where does this fit? The skilling, in the skilling, there are, for example, textiles. Women have already traditional skills, like in Assam. A woman spends 1 month to make a sari and sells it at 1,000 rupees. So where does it fit? That is one thing. Distress sale, primarily all the products in the tribal belt and everywhere they produce, but there are distress sales. So where does it fit in finding out customer and employer, or where does it really fit? I just struggling with this. Thank you.
Fundamentally, this is because the cost of production for handicrafts is higher. So I think there's a larger problem there.
I'm going to keep the panel moving, so over to you, Kit.
Dr. Gayathri kind of touched upon digital platforms. I think my experience is more into skilling and over last couple of years into job platforms. So maybe I'll touch upon that instead of keeping it very broad in terms of digital platforms. In my opinion, no doubt, as the earlier panelists kind of touched upon, that there have been a shift from conventional way of hiring to digital means, be it job portals, be it social platforms like LinkedIn and many others, or even company websites if we looked at today, with referral being the prominent mode of hiring even today. And there are several job platforms, all of us are aware, but if I take a quick survey in this room, I'm pretty sure all of us will come up with only 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe maximum 10 known names which have made names for themselves over the last few years. Hence, while there has been kind of a shift in terms of percentage, but if you look at overall success of job platforms vis-a-vis the overall demand supply which exists, I think the percentage is insignificant and a lot more needs to be done. And I think earlier panel talked about data I think Bhavya mentioned about 80-20 organized, unorganized sector. My data was 90-10, but I think it improved probably over a period of time. And it is clearly off of all the job platforms. If you look at most of them, I would not say all, but most of them continue focusing on that organized sector 10%. So that is where the focus is. But the 90% or 80% is where very few platforms are insignificant platforms are working, and hence, as the topic suggests, clearly there are promises, there are challenges if we talk of digital platforms, and in particular job platforms. I was asked by Dr. Fazana to emphasize more from an employer side, and if I look at from an employer perspective, uh, I, as an employer, because of the job platform, because of the easy access which a job seeker gets, I get more number of applications. But the challenge for me as an employer is uh, those are too many numbers. I have to spend a lot of time in screening. For one job, invariably, it could range from anywhere between 100 to 1,000 or even more in case of logistics sector number of applications. And I, as an employer, how do I spend time in sorting, screening, and effort which is needed for that? Most of the time, this happens because as a job platform, if I have to attract an employer, I need more and more job seekers on my platform, and hence I don't keep any entry barrier for or minimal entry barrier for a job seeker to register and then create a profile, and then hence give easy access to at least apply for the basic job. And this results into, I would say, lower quality of leads or lower conversion, maybe less than even 1% if we talk of job portals at times, and that incurs a lot of cost. Some of the earlier panelists talked about. Second, from an employer perspective, if I look at, of course, I'll get as an employer enhanced reach in terms of geography because there are digitally I can reach out to more and more job seekers. But from a job seeker perspective, earlier it was discussed whether it is a job location while I'm sitting in Odisha, but the job is in Bangalore. While I can apply, but I'll have to still travel for interview. I'll have to still migrate if I get a job. The relocation cost vis-a-vis the compensation, and especially if we talk of blue gray collar workers, it is significant, and there are such challenges. Of course, the job platforms provide better communication channels because of the bot usage, because of the app notifications, because of WhatsApp, email, etc., etc. However, if we talk of blue and gray collar, again, earlier panelists touched upon, uh, still today, human touch is important. That's why so much talk of skilling. I, as a blue gray collar worker, I am not exposed to many things. I still have lack of trust when I look at the digital means, and I want to speak to someone. I want to understand what is that job, what is that salary, what is my profile, what is that career progression, and that is not very much possible if we talk of job platforms. Today, it is possible in some form, but of course, from a trust perspective, it takes time. And hence, as I mentioned, while employers get a lot of applications, they have to necessarily resort to AI means to kind of sorting and screening, without which it is difficult to screen 1,000 applications for one job. And what happens in that process is that because they resort to, and this may not be so much for blue gray collar workers, it may be more for white collar workers, but still, what happens is because I resort to AI tech tools and likewise in terms of screening using certain keywords, the challenge is I may miss some good applicants because I, as an applicant for every job, I may not necessarily customize my CV or resume which is needed to be shortlisted and likewise. Hence, if you look at the digital means, while it provides that reach, the question is, are both employers and job seekers happy or satisfied? Uh, I don't know the answer. I mean, it would be sometimes yes, sometimes no. But from an employer perspective, I think the challenge is the accuracy and the verifiability of the candidate itself. While lot of actions have been taken on that, accountability from a job seeker point of view. Somebody earlier mentioned that while the application is made, and when the employer tries to reach out, the worker or the job seeker is not reachable, not available, the number has changed, and likewise. And hence, again, the same issue with regards to quality of leads and conversion, and thereby so and so forth. From a candidate perspective, of course, I apply to job because there are 1,000 more competitors in line. My resume most of the times may go unnoticed. In job platform world, we call it ghosting of candidates. So I mean, they kind of neither hear from the candidate employers or do not get any feedback whether I'm selected, not selected, if not selected, why I'm not selected, and likewise. And at times, because of the open kind of environment, the quality of jobs itself is a challenge, is what happens. Beyond this, I would say there are other challenges, especially if I'm a job seeker, which we have faced. There are a lot of fraud jobs which comes on the job platforms, and while a lot of actions are being taken, still because I need a job, I am a needy job seeker, especially blue gray collar worker, I fall prey to such kind of things. There are as a job platform, I need more and more jobs to attract more and more job seekers. Hence, I do not expire jobs at times because I need the job to be on my platform. And hence, from a job seeker perspective, there are outdated jobs, and hence, even if I apply, I'll not get feedback from the employer. There are, and I think Bhavya would be the right person to talk about it, as she mentioned about the labor laws. There are a lot of challenges which are there in terms of data privacy, where my data is getting used, leaked, etc. I'm not too sure, and the trust issues which exist today. So before we get into the solution mode as to what could be the solutions, as the topic says, promises, challenges, and what could be the solutions for that, if you look at the macroeconomic data, I think that's also an important, again, from an enterprises point of view. In India, there are close to, I would say, 63 million enterprises, out of which close to about 24,000 odd enterprises have 10 crore or more paid up capital. If you look at Indian cities, there are 48 Indian cities with population of more than 1 million, and rest all are less than 1 million. If you look at number of villages, there are 6 lakh villages. 50% of that are having population less than 1,000. Now, when we talk of jobs, career, whether it is for men, women, this data is important. Demand supply always makes it important, right? And hence the question is, should the job be taken to people, or people should go to job? And I think the debate can go both ways. But I think we have to accept that for now, this 48 cities or a little more remains the engine of growth. And that's where the jobs are there. And that's where people migrate. Thus, from an overall perspective, I would say there are two kind of macro level solution which I can think of, or whether it will work holistically or not. But from a job platform, I think most important, in my opinion, is the job platforms which will work on an integrated end-to-end solution is possibly one which have larger chances of success, whether it is from awareness to career counseling to job readiness, not only on the digital domain, but also on the 21st century skill, to kind of providing the data information which I as a job seeker need transparently about the job, or from an employer perspective, how I can get verified, accurate data of the job seeker, and likewise, and then the connecting happens. Second, I would say, yes, I completely agree with what Dr. Gayathri mentioned, but skilling, I would say, it has to work hand in hand with job platforms. I do believe it is significant for several reasons. One, I think earlier panelists talk about the reasons why women workforce is not getting into it, lack of digital knowledge, lack of digital access. Probably skilling institutions play that role, not only on that, but also connecting both employers as well as workers. If we talk of women, I think, in my opinion, I think, or not my opinion, I think it is a fact, more women work than men. It's only that the women don't get paid, right? I mean, all my mother, my wife, my everybody at your home, everybody works, but most of the time we do not get paid. And the reasons why it is not there, whether it is education, whether it is conversion of education skills to jobs, or maybe other reasons which were discussed earlier. So I'll not spend time on that. But from a job portal perspective, I think Dr. Gayathri touched upon from the digital platforms. So is the case with job platforms. We do not have specific mention of whether it is for women workforce or likewise. And the reason is, of course, it is market dynamics, right? It is not that one doesn't want to do it, but that is where it comes from employer side. And likewise, there are economic reasons, I would say. If I had to give a classic example, look at films, right? If you look at films, most of the film storylines are male oriented. But if you look at television, maybe more are female oriented. I think there are economic reasons for that. And that also is, I would say, lies with job platforms. What are the solutions? Some of the solutions touched upon, but if I have to kind of pick up two, while I had listed many due to lack of time, I would say one is how do we ensure policy framework which enables, and again, I think adding to what Dr. Gayathri mentioned, in addition to kind of providing access to finance, capital, and likewise on digitization, etc. Can there be, for example, role models, since Dr. Sakshi is also here from NITI Aayog, can there be role models whereby there are women clusters, maybe by women, for women, of women, and then it could be both on the digital as well as industrial side, and likewise, easier said than done, but somewhere we have to start. Finally, I would say that since I come from the skilling sector, in 2000 till 2014, there were a lot of efforts which were being made in terms of skilling. Different ministries, different governments, different departments were working on it. But when a specific ministry was formed, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, and then of course NSTC came into picture, and specific focus was there. We are seeing that change, and that change of course takes time. Can there be such specific initiative goal, maybe in terms of ministry? Not only, there are several ministries probably working on women empowerment, but can there be specific focus initiative for jobs for women? I personally feel, I think that would give a lot of directive to what we are all trying to achieve. Last but not the least, I would say the initiative which DPWE is taking can be extremely useful, not only in terms of generating the data to address the information asymmetry, but also I would say it has a huge potential, since I've been interacting with Dr. Farzana and her team in generating multidimensional data, real-time data, which can be used to provide newer solutions to the challenges which are being discussed today. So maybe I'll stop here and happy to take any questions.
I wanted to ask you, Ketul, when you mentioned that the employers usually use AI for screening the job applicants, from your experience or your insights into this, is true that there might be some disadvantages that women face due to this AI screening, particularly because the way the data is coming again from a very male pool, and so how these tools might be disadvantaging women. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I would say just one point is that this may be more applicable to white collar jobs than so much in blue gray collar. Two is, I think it may not necessarily for women only, it is both men and women, but for women it may be more, because if I as a woman, if I'm not in the job market, I may not know what kind of CV resume I need to prepare, which will enable me to the interview stage. I may be capable, but I may not, I need to first get into that interview or shortlisting stage, and hence there may be more effect than men, because they would have already got that rejection, and likewise probably he would have understood that, okay, I'm not getting calls, there is something wrong with my CV, and hence I customize my CV and resume, which can enable me to get that job.
Deepak Maheshwari from Career. Just two quick points. One, on AI-based screening, one of the most effective things which has worked is if you mask the gender at the first level of screening. So the person, whoever is doing the screening, if you just mask the gender as well as the name, that itself has a higher chances of increasing the people being shortlisted, considering all other things being same. Because at times what happens, the moment somebody sees the gender as well as the name, that itself becomes a negative bias in certain situations. Second thing is related to the previous session, just want to mention very quickly, When we look at things like EPFO or ESIC, etc., one very important thing is, as far as I know, in the Provident Fund, I cannot get Provident from two different companies for the work on the same date. Whereas as a gig worker, I may be working with Ola as well as Uber or maybe others also. So that's another thing when we are talking about parity in terms of workers and employees on these things. So maybe people may have to look at proportionate contributions or some flexibility around those type of things. So on one hand, yes, these are very important tools for us to consider, but at the same time, it's also useful to consider the possibility of having this dual or triple roles for that matter with some people. And also, there's no minimum commitment of time. So even if, let's say, somebody who works only for 2 hours, and compared to somebody else who puts in on an average 8 hours, and this is irrespective of the gender, how much benefits, etc., they should be getting. So just wanted to mention these points. Thank you.
Over to you, Sakshi.
Through our report and through our work at NITI Aayog, we've been highlighting both the opportunities and challenges that different categories, different social groups of workers have in the gig and platform economy. Our work, in fact, mentions that we need more research studies that can understand the potential that gig and platforms sector has for women, for persons with disabilities, for youth. So I'm glad that this discussion today and your study is going to be focusing a lot on the potential that digital platforms have for women. NITI Aayog's report estimates that 7.7 million workers form a part of the gig and platform sector, which is projected to grow to 23.5 million by 2030. And we also state that these could be underestimates. There could be more workers in the sector. For women especially, there are both, as everyone's been highlighting, there are both opportunities and there are barriers. Given that the sector doesn't discriminate between workers, there are low entry barriers. I studied for my doctoral research. I studied women workers in the construction sector, in the government sector, where I found that there were strong structural barriers that prevented women from taking up certain kinds of occupations or roles which men were able to take up in the construction sector, for instance, as masons, as karigars in the government sector. Whereas women were always delegated to the category of beldar or as home-based workers in the government sector, where they remained invisible, where their incomes were low, and there were barriers also to their upward mobility. Even when a woman construction worker upgraded her skills through learning on the job, she could not get better wages. So these are some of the barriers which we are looking to see if digital platforms which are enabled by technology can they help women overcome such structural barriers that have been existed in traditional sectors like manufacturing, construction. Can technology enable women to overcome such barriers? First of all, as we also talk about in our study, that we cite GSMA data which says that only 25% of women compared to 41% of men had access to smartphones in 2020. So women often in households, especially in rural households, may not have access to smartphones at all, which is a primary requirement to access jobs through digital platforms or be a part of digital platforms. So policy initiatives need to, of course, focus on access to technology for women, especially in rural areas. A lot of mobilization that happens through SHGs and through other initiatives needs to have a technology component we see we were talking about skilling, and when we go and study skilling initiatives in especially in aspirational districts and in other areas, we find that there is a lot of skilling happening, but after undergoing that, after being part of the skill program, women are often left clueless. They don't know how to, take that ahead to have remunerative businesses or activities that can give them sustainable incomes. So access to technology along with hand-holding support, mentorship support, access to finance is what is needed to really tap the potential or opportunity that that digital platforms may have to offer for different categories of workers. In urban areas, there are different categories of work that happens through gig and platform, through different platforms. What we also need to pay attention to, especially in the context of women workers, is that a lot of women, through their social media networks, Facebook, Instagram, are able to, sell products like saris and other products. And these are women who did not have an income at all before, and are now able to have some income using their own social media network. So I think that's something that needs to be studied in greater depth. That how is this kind of work lending an agency to women, given the fact that some of these women would not be earning at all. Also asking questions that is it something sustainable for you? Is it something long term? Is it really contributing in a big way to your household income? Also, when we're looking at women's agency, it's important to not just look at access to earnings, but also control of earnings. In households, as we know, that sometimes, like when I studied construction worker households, women often did not have control over their earnings. They were also earning. They were going to work along with their husbands on construction sites, but the wages were very often handed over to the husband himself, and the woman worker never, or sometimes did not have an access to her own earnings. And whereas when she took up work as a domestic worker, because construction work does not always offer continuous work. So when they took up work as domestic workers, they had better access, better control over their own earnings. Also, I feel when we talk about skill development, a lot of skill learning for women happens through their own social networks, through informal channels, learning from their mothers, friends, sisters, neighbors. So that is something which needs to be examined, that how social networks are playing an important role in women's skilling. And stakeholders, especially grassroots organizations, can leverage such social networks, such community networks to impart skill training to women. Especially, we talk about remote work in this sector, where a lot of women are actually not in touch with their co-workers, unlike on-site work, where you're meeting workers, where there is potential for collectivization, getting organized into trade unions. Remote work has effectively no potential for collectivization. So this is where we need to understand that how women's collective networks can be strengthened in the sector. Because if we are to talk about skill upgradation, if we are to talk about, we recently had somebody from freelancers.com, they have come out with a report on what skills are going to be, what skills would be relevant in the coming years for freelance workers. And they talk about web design skills, programming skills, a lot of creative content. So women need to have those skills. We again see that a lot of men and boys acquire such skills, and fewer women acquire such skills that are going to be relevant in the coming years as well.
Thanks, Sakshi. Any questions for Sakshi?
Ketul mentioned the need for data, but that was just talking. I think there are two aspects to this. One is data which exists with the platforms themselves, right? And which are not there in the public domain. And of course, there's a lot of hesitancy on the part of the platforms to share those data because those are related to your business and, and so on and so forth. But also there's this other policy issue, which is we really don't know what the numbers of these gig and platform workers are. So NITI Aayog is in a position to sort of think of, okay, how do we ensure now in the future with the PLFS and so on and so forth, we have questions which specifically ask about this new nature of work and try to pin down the numbers, and it will also allow us to see what the growth in this on the numbers of platform workers is, and they might be combining it along with traditional work that they are doing. So is there any initiative or thought going on within NITI Aayog in trying to put these numbers together through the usual labor surveys that we have?
Yes, in fact, our study has specific recommendations for in the PLFS what kind of questions could be asked so that we're able to capture the numbers of gig and platform workers. Specific questions such as access to smartphones, a computer, so on, and what kind of contract you have. So these are some of the recommendations which we've made and which we've already been taking up with the Ministry of Statistics and program implementation. Also, we talk about specific surveys specific surveys for gig and platform workers. Labor Bureau could be the appropriate organization to conduct such large-scale national surveys specific to gig and platform workers.
I was wondering if the survey that Dr. Gayathri quoted about platforms generally having an issue with onboarding costs for women workers. So has there been any either thought within the government, or has there been any advocacy from platforms to receive financial incentives? Or if there's been any proposal at an advanced stage within the government?
So our study does talk about incentives, including fiscal incentives for platform companies that keep specific targets for engaging more women as part of their workforce. We also talk about, in terms of skilling, more outcome-oriented skill development programs where skilling by platforms should be accompanied by onboarding of women. Of course, it does involve a cost on the platform to train the workers, but that's something which is very important, especially for women, that to have integrated programs, not just skill them and then let them be on their own, but integrated programs where there is skill development and then they're onboarded to the platform. We've also documented initiatives by some platforms such as Ola and others where women have been trained and onboarded to their platforms. Cutting down of costs, yes, can come through fiscal incentives. Also, a lot of what we generally find is that the cost of being trained is at present is on the workers themselves, especially in the gig and platform sector. It's the worker who's already trained, for instance, as a plumber, as a beautician. I talked about social networks as especially in the care economy, as beauticians, as somebody providing home care services. Women they get trained through their own friends, neighbors. So the cost is often so much on the worker herself. So, but the platforms often provide at least orientation, some kind of orientation or skill training for workers to familiarize themselves, especially in dealing with clients, how they should be dealing with clients. So that training, in fact, should also have a component of how they should be able to deal with if they encounter any problems related to safety and so on when they go to employers' homes, when they are on the roads and so on.
Over to you, Aishwarya.
Hello, everybody. First of all, congratulations to Dr. Farzana Afridi and team for starting a very important and time-sensitive, initiative, which looks to gaining more mainstreaming women's participation in the economy by leveraging digital platforms. Thanks also to Yamini and the rest of the panelists, in fact, for putting so many thoughts around platformization and women's economic empowerment together so well. I am going to make a brief presentation on the studies we've conducted at OMI Foundation on the challenges and the opportunities that the platform economy affords to women, specifically in the country. I am the executive director of OMI Foundation. Some of the previous roles I've played included starting South India's earliest all-women auto rickshaw fleet. And I've had the opportunity to see it grow and hand it over to other organizations that are running it successfully. And in my entrepreneurial, endeavor, have also had the opportunity to learn from so many other organizations in this space that are actively advocating for feminizing a lot of these larger male-dominated roles. And therefore, I hope to present some of those perspectives as well today during the presentation. What is OMI Foundation? First, OMI is a policy research and social innovation think tank. We carry out research at the intersection of mobility, innovation, governance, and public good. Our work focuses on interdisciplinary, large-scale, evidence-based research cutting across three thematic areas: clean mobility, future mobility, and inclusive mobility. And it is here that we work towards paving the road for future of work and platform economy to fulfill the modern promise of labor. Here's a selection of our publications. Our recently launched Ease of Moving Index is the outcome of India's largest mobility survey involving 50,000 plus citizens, stratified by gender, disability, income. A significant proportion of our respondents were also gig and platform economy workers. We conducted this mobility survey across 40 cities covering 25 states and 3 union territories, representing 25% of India's urban population. Likewise, our future of work research has involved us interview over 5,000 workers within and outside the platform economy and an additional 800 women workers specifically. Much of our work is limited to location-specific jobs that India's platform economy offers. Through today's presentation on digital platforms and women's economic empowerment, I'll present my perspectives on how women are taking the driving seat, how platforms are heralding a new model of work, what are the key practices and challenges in the ecosystem, and what recommendations can we consider. On that note, let's get started. Unlocking jobs in the platform economy. Digitalization of mobility is extremely apparent, it's highly visible, and is here to stay. Driving taxis and cabs, auto rickshaws, and bike taxis is an opportunity for a workforce that has hitherto been neglected. National and subnational governments in India are beginning to recognize the need for such livelihood opportunities to be unlocked in higher degrees. Mobility platforms acknowledge what needs to be done here and cater to the market supply of assets and labor by using technological tools. So this speaks to what the previous panelists have also mentioned, that driving jobs have always existed, but what the platform economy is able to do is that thanks to more and more consumers getting attracted to this mode of movement, is able to unlock a lot more such opportunities for the country, not just in major urban agglomerations, but also in the hinterlands. Labor market, as we all know, is traditionally arranged as formal and informal. What are formal and informal forms of work? Just building on what the first panel spoke about today, formal work involves an employer hiring an employee under an established working agreement that includes salary or wages, but also offers health benefits and provides defined work hours and work days, retirement benefits, etc. The inverse refers to informal work. So by this definition, the formal-informal dichotomy excludes over 90% of India's labor force from gaining access to social security. Should we then not revisit, rethink, and perhaps dismantle this dichotomy itself? Dismantling the dichotomy does not mean erasure of micro and small enterprises. We all know small economic units engage over 70 to 90% of the labor force in the country. They are the largest drivers of job creation in India and globally as well. Thus, they are integral to India's socio-economic development strategy. But what I am professing for is to look beyond formal and informal or organized and unorganized dichotomies and call for the strengthening of the small enterprise of India. The so-called informal sector needs to be upgraded. Steps like improving infrastructure, boosting skills and know-how, and providing access to financial services needs to be adopted. This is precisely what the platform economy does. 21st century India has two new categories of workers called gig and platform workers. This is where I slightly differ from some of the previous comments made on this topic. The Code on Social Security 2020 defines gig worker as one working outside the traditional employer-employee arrangement. So an accountant, designer, driver, freelancing for many clients is a gig worker. A platform worker is a form of a gig worker who uses the medium of platforms to gain access to livelihoods. Gig and platform workers, both the Code on Social Security and we at OMI Foundation see as different from unorganized and informal workers, in that gig and platform workers enjoy flexibility and choice of labor, guaranteed payments, and augmented earnings, as we shall see very soon. So this brings me to where are women in the platform economy and how are they taking the driving seat? We at OMI Foundation investigated the role of platforms in unlocking jobs for men, women, persons with disabilities, and others. A rough estimate by OMI tells us that there are as many as 80,000 women engaged in the platform economy today as delivery personnel, logistics and warehouse professionals, passenger mobility drivers, home and urban home service professionals. However, women constitute less than 2% of the platform workforce. OMI Foundation and Children's Investment Fund Foundation set out to understand enablers and barriers of women's participation in the platform economy. To achieve this goal, we conducted 2 surveys and interviewed experts. We began by speaking to 84 women platform workers with urban companies, Swiggy and Saka Cabs. We then interviewed 600 plus women not affiliated to any platforms across the cities of Bengaluru, Mysuru, Jaipur, Jodhpur, and Udaipur and Delhi. We asked women over 50 questions on a range of indicators from their demographic profile, asset ownership to aspirations, attitudes and anxieties, work experience, satisfaction, security training and skilling. Additionally, we spoke to 40 organizations in the ecosystem, representatives of the Government of India, governments of Karnataka, Delhi, and Rajasthan, as well as civil society organizations and platform businesses themselves. What are some of the findings? We found interesting trends in the type of women who become platform workers. So we found that women are more likely to take up platform jobs after education and marriage. This is a positive finding contrary to the macroeconomic trend where married Indian women withdraw from the labor force on account of caregiving responsibilities and for enabling families' upward social mobility. Sakshi and the speakers before me have also mentioned, friends and family form a critical support system, empowering women with livelihood-based information, among others. Women choose platform work to satisfy their desire of becoming an entrepreneur, their own boss. They join platforms to apply the skills they've learned. These are some of the key motivations cited by women who've taken up platform jobs. Women choose platform work as a full-time opportunity. Platform labor forms a primary source of income for the majority of the women that we've interviewed. Women choose platform labor to pay for their higher education or to support dependents. Platforms offer higher earning opportunities for women. Women prefer platform work over other jobs and are more likely to continue in the platform economy. What about women outside the platform economy? While the benefits of the platform ecosystem are evident, the awareness among non platform workers is extremely low, resulting in an even lower willingness to join digital platforms. Women in the age group of 18 to 25 years show the highest level of willingness. Willingness is also high among owners of assets already, assets such as vehicles and smartphones, compared to those without access to any of these assets. But what about the impact of platforms on women? How are platforms empowering women to take the right step into the driving seat? Studies around the world show how women are more likely to share assets than have exclusive control over them. Limited ownership and control inhibits women's ability to monetize idle capacity of assets. Similarly, challenges around women's mobile phone usage inhibit communication and information flow, resulting in poorer access to education, employment, healthcare, and financial services. Uh, the speakers before me have also spoken to the wide gender gap in asset ownership for land, motor vehicles, and mobile phones, all of which is indicative of a huge missed opportunity for unlocking women's potential. It is here that the role of platform economy gains significance. Platform businesses are able to unlock the commercial value of assets, both tangible, such as motor vehicles, smartphones, and intangible, such as skills or permits that you need to hold to be able to do a specific form of a business, generating an array of livelihood opportunities. This is especially beneficial for women to whom platforms afford flexibility to monetize assets, typically shared with family members at times that the assets are idle. Thus, by providing its participants the agency to choose what and when they monetize, a feat largely absent from traditional employment, platforms can finally de-link female labor force participation from the limitations of conventional labor markets. Platforms are thus helping reframe the role of women in private and public life. Labor force participation is no longer a binary decision between household duties and economic aspirations, but women now have the choice to work at will. Let's switch gears to understand key practices and challenges in the ecosystem. Women's limited access or ownership of assets, including finance, is a huge barrier, and this needs to be addressed on priority. Platforms offer innovative solutions here. All the businesses that we've interviewed to date take steps in helping a woman worker open a bank account or convert an existing one into a mobile banking account. Accessing institutional credit, we all know, has been a historical roadblock for women. But how platforms address this lack of collateral that the woman may have, which limits her access to institutional credit, is by offering cash flow based lending. Cash flow based loans in collaboration with microcredit or fintech companies are on the rise, and it is here that further research and policy enablement has to happen to get microcredit, which is cash flow based, in the hands of the women as well. Platforms are also offering financial literacy courses, from Urban Company to Ola and more. We've seen many of these businesses take the initiative to engage with the workers very closely on digital literacy and financial literacy as well. When we look at skill development, we know that fewer women compared to men undergo any type of formal or informal skill development. That's a given. According to the National Skills Development Corporation, the reason for nearly no women working as electricians, plumbers, and carpenters in the platform economy, and the larger issue of women's lack of participation in the platform economy,
in the words of the NSDC, has nothing to do with the platform economy itself. This lack of participation is an outcome of intrinsic social biases, familial obligations, and outdated perceptions surrounding women as breadwinners. However, women in rural areas have come forward as community guardians. With the support from the NSDC, women have opted for multi-skilling courses that include plumbing and masonry to work as rural toilet builders. These efforts were undertaken on a mission mode by the NSDC. This suggests that such efforts to overcome entrenched social biases need to be implemented at the community level in rural and urban areas alike. On their part, platform businesses are offering on-the-job training, classroom training, and in-app training. Platform-led skill development can be seen in collaborations between rideshare and delivery platforms, for instance, with the Automotive Skill Development Council, other arms of the NSDC as well, to upskill workers. Under the PM Swanidhi program, for example, delivery platforms onboarded street vendors and upskilled them in digital and financial proficiency. The penultimate issue we turn to is mobility. Providing safe, comfortable, accessible, affordable, and reliable mobility services to women is imperative not only for women's higher participation in the labor force, but for women to live as empowered citizens with dignity. In the study we conducted, 47% of our respondents own vehicles. Of these, 84% own two-wheelers, 13% own four-wheelers, and 3% three-wheelers. These women may find two-wheelers to be more accessible simply because they're easier to maintain, and it's easier to find parking during peak hours. The choice of a two-wheeler may also be the result of financial constraints. Among the vehicle owners in our pool of respondents, 47%, 50% of women have brought their vehicular assets for attaching to the platform businesses that they were engaged with. This suggests that half of the respondents see lucrative value in such platform jobs and have invested in a vehicle to make them more mobile. This is also reflective of the larger vehicle ownership patterns in the country, with a majority of the country owning two-wheelers. With mobility also comes numerous associated issues pertaining to women-only mobility solutions for women by women services, which have not scaled in the past. And other associated challenges, which even Professor Afridi brought up in the first panel, lack of ready access to functional public toilets for women, all of which need to be urgently addressed and on war footing. When it comes to safety and security, collective efforts are key, since the workplace is the city itself. Here, many platforms have undertaken safety and gender sensitization trainings for the male members of their platforms, as well as, of course, providing the necessary inputs to women. Based on all of this, we were able to derive recommendations both for the industry and the civil society, along with government agencies. The industry can mainstream women's participation by carrying out 6 broad interventions. Businesses can undertake partnerships with CSOs and NGOs to promote legal, economic, social rights of women, especially from marginal and vulnerable groups, thereby increasing their potential to take up non-traditional livelihoods. Platform businesses can implement communication plans which are gender inclusive. For instance, they can ensure there is a higher share of women managers and supervisors in the organization. In fact, I think we can take this during the discussion. We also speak to how the industry and the larger civil society can provide innovative social protection measures in our study as well. With that, I'll take your leave, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Let me open it up. Any couple of quick questions for Aishwarya, and then we'll have another round just for any speaker. But any questions for Aishwarya in particular?
My name is Saurav, and I represent Policy and Development Advisory Group. And my question is to Dr. Gayathri. So, from our research, what we found that mostly for the NEET women, not in education and employment and training, that the role models play a very important role in their aspiration towards skilling, eventually leading to a job. So the thing that you mentioned about an organization who is trying to get more women on board, so maybe to start with, it's like only one out of those 40 women that they're able to get on board. But do you think that initial higher investment, if that is able to create more role models, would actually then make it more easier both for this platform to attract women and also these women to sort of be more confident towards taking up jobs in these platforms?
Any other questions? Anyone's just... Oh, yeah.
Hi,
go
I'm
ahead.
Aarti. I'm from ICRIER. My question is, how would you say, how do you feel that digital platforms affects the bargaining power of women in the informal economy? So it's been a big issue, especially for home-based workers. So I was just wondering what your thoughts on that would be.
All right, back to the panel. One on higher initial investment, creating role models, and the other
So I
one is-
completely agree. It's always been proven that higher role models, but role models are generational, right? So investments, and that's where I was coming from a cost of acquisition. And if I was just listening to Aishwarya's point also. I hope I got my number correct. But fundamentally, she's saying that today about 2% of the people are on the platform. Women are in the mobility. But we can actually equate it. So some of the platforms will have if you put service and product, it will be slightly higher, which fundamentally means it's generational, right? That is where I was coming from, saying that what you're saying is absolutely right. But who's going to invest? Is it the private company? Is it the state? So the self-help group movement was done by the state, on top of which you had MFIs and NBFCs. So you have to have something which is going to make that investment happen. And that's why I was saying capital becomes very important. It's not necessary state spend. I think I just wanted to make one distinction. To me, financial subsidies may not be the answer. It's important, but in a welfare state, it's important, and India is a largely welfare state. So it is important, but I think the question really is how do you incentivize and what do you incentivize? So role model, is it for skilling? See, the reason why I sort of stepped out of skilling is that would be my default to answer. But to me, skilling has to happen in schools. Why is our education system not integrated with world of work? So that means post skilling should actually be reskilling, upskilling, and rebooting. So today that element is taken the prima facie for jobs, whereas our education and world of work skilling we're not really addressing. And Ketul is possibly more can answer it far better than I can, but I think that's where we need to switch. So that means your role model of where it is needs to world of work needs to come, and the national education policy calls it out. So I think that's where it is. I don't have an answer to yours whether it does bargaining or not. But I think if I hear Aishwarya's point where she says guaranteed. So like, for example, it is guaranteed for the task. I think it's guaranteed for a task. So does task, if you don't do more tasks, you will not have a guaranteed wage. So your bargaining, the entire concept of bargaining then needs to be rethought, because it's not full-time wage, and it has never, if only 10% of our population or 20% of our population is taking a full-time employment wage, in that case, that means for the 80% we need to rethink what is bargaining. So there is no, the platforms can be multiple, platform can be single, worker could be multiple, worker could be single. How do you then say for a task I'm guaranteed? So that means if I'm given 35 rupees or 55 rupees to do a delivery or whatever the amount is for dropping, 100 rupees for dropping in a place, we'll have to now calibrate it on that.
Thanks, Gayatri. Anyone wants to take the question on bargaining power?
So I just wanted to add one more point to Dr. Gayatri on the bargaining. I think the bargaining needs to be looked at in a different fashion now. It is not necessarily the wage bargaining, but as a woman, if I work on the platforms, I can bargain on the time which I'm able to devote to work. I can bargain on the location which I'm working at my convenience. So it is more on the convenience, time, effort which I need to put in vis-a-vis what I want to achieve, and not necessarily only on the wage side. That's the point I wanted to add.
Thank you. And just to add to that, in response to the question on bargaining power, I think bargaining power needs to be looked at both within the household, whether a woman's bargaining power within the household in intra-household gender relations is changing or not, and also as well as in the work sphere and larger public sphere, is women's bargaining power changing or not? So that's a very important question which this study should take up for digital platforms. Of course, we you know we see that it's a faceless platform where employers, where I don't even know who my employer actually is. I've never interacted with my employer in person. I always interact with the platform. So that of course can affect, obviously does affect my bargaining power with my employer, uh, in contrast to other sectors such as employment in a factory, in an office, on a construction site, where you have face-to-face interactions with your employer, where there is more potential for collectivization, trade union activities, and so on. Uh, but also to just to also add that whatever developments we've seen so far, for instance, in Rajasthan, the announcement about a tripartite board for gig and platform workers. So the trade union played a very important role there. A lot of discussions were held with the trade union, the gig and platform, trade unions representing gig and platform workers. So policy, research, all needs to see how women's collectivization can be strengthened, how women's participation in trade unions, especially these upcoming trade unions in the sector, can be strengthened and expanded for them to have better bargaining power.
Thank you to this exciting panel. I think we could talk for another hour on these issues, and really, we have so many unanswered questions and so many things we don't know about this space and where it's going to lead. So I'm going to just make like 4 or 5 points that I think ties this back into maybe hopefully will flow back into the research project. I think the first one is quality. This whole question of quality of work. What kind of work is this? Is it better work? Is it really semi-formalization of informal workers, as some of our panelists talked about? Or is it feminization of work into breaking, in the traditional sense that feminization of work meant fragmentation, breaking things down into micro tasks, having lower security, having more informalization, actually. So in some ways, are men also then becoming part of a more semi-informal economy where they are losing bargaining power? I think, to me, this whole question of quality of work is so important. And I think from a women's perspective, definitely the question of access, of information, of infrastructure that can support women's work, translating from more traditional sort of work, comes into this space as well. The second, I think, is a question that Farzana asked, which is, how are these algorithms really getting built? Are there, what's the information that's going into feed into the making of these platforms, into the selection processes, into the criteria that are getting programmed in, where things get, into the conditions, a whole set of things that are now becoming so digitized. Like, what is, how do we inform that? How do we analyze that? So I hope that we'll get lots of insights from your work coming out of this. The third is something we didn't talk about very much, but this whole question of gender segregation, of occupational segregation, which is, I think, a term from my generation, but we don't talk about it very much anymore. But I think this whole occupational segregation of women in beauty, in particular segments, compared to, say, mobility or logistics, there are just huge barriers. And I think that it's no longer enough to say these are only gender norms within communities and households, and that's what we need to shift. I think we need to have markets also becoming equal partners in solving for that. Now, what that will be, is it an incentive? Is it a whole set of, a suite of offerings that platforms can do can create in order to get women into those systems, is something, again, TBD. But I think the headline is that the markets need to be solving for this, and not just saying, oh, it's actually in the households and we are neutral, right? I don't know that any evidence shows that anymore. And the final, I think, is this whole question of networks. I mean, we talked so much about women's networks, and the earlier studies, some of the earlier panel also talked about a previous study led by Farzana and others on the role of women's networks. And I think, how do you turn women's networks into a strength rather than, in some ways, a constraining or a binding factor, right? And therefore, to me, there's two parts of that. There's that part, and then there's the part where platform work, gig work like this kind of fragmented task work doesn't allow that kind of bonding, that kind of solidarity that gets created in workplaces that Sakshi talked about. So I think there's an interesting lens that one can bring, or a set of questions. They're not necessarily linked, but a set of questions that one can actually at least start to investigate, if not entirely during the duration of this project, but pose that question, like how should we understand networks? Because that's that other big paradigm that we sort of see with this economy, right? There's digital, and then there's the network effect. With that, maybe I'll close and thank our great panelists for just keeping us engaged, and thank you, audience, for all your questions, and thank you and all the best to this research project.
Good afternoon, everyone. At the outset, firstly, congratulations to Dr. Farzana and the project team for taking up such a pertinent topic, to be investigated through this huge project. And I think a wonderful effort on bringing both the academia and industry into in the two enriching panels that we had now. So we got both while we highlighted the huge, distressing gaps that we saw, but also the promising opportunities that are ahead. As very interestingly highlighted, we see that the projected rate of this informal sector growing is around 23 million, which is a huge opportunity for the workforce to participate in, but also it comes with its own set of challenges and concern. We had, with these identified gaps, I think the second panel also elaborated on what could be these enabling factors, from the supply side perspective to encourage more labor force participation. Some recent experiences from I'm just back from the field, and I cannot not share, what I saw. While we saw that the 18% labor force participation of women, I just came back from a state which has almost 60% women labor force participation in Sikkim, Northeast. That's an outlier. But definitely that is not a very rosy picture. There is this underlying story going on there, because if you look at the nature of employment, you'll find women being employed more in low-paying jobs, And this is the set of women who are also most vulnerable, as IMF predicts that once these economies turn digital and digital platforms set in, these women are the ones who are at the most risk of losing their job because of their inability to even adapt to digital platforms. And then the panel also touched upon these key areas that the project also looks into, whether it is skilling gap or informational gap, etc. And not that there has not been enough efforts in this field, but it has been noted and there has been effort. But I think through this project, I'm sure the project team will be able to explore deeper into these areas. Not to say that one barrier is, not to say that we are prioritizing one barrier above the other. I think each of them are equally important to be explored. But definitely, for example, in terms of skilling under the STRIVE program for Delhi NCR, there is this skilling given to specifically the women-led ITIs in Delhi. We had the opportunity to actually do the baseline and then the midline and the end line. And, as a follow-up rate, we did some 4,000 current ITI students in 2018. And then post that, while we do the follow-up, we just saw that only 20% or so were actually still in the workforce and used the skilling and the opportunity given to them through the STRIVE program. This is an ongoing study and continuing study. But while women join, so there's this one issue of women joining the workforce, making them, enabling them to join the workforce, overcoming the barriers. And then then have a look at the core issues while they are being employed. What happens beyond that. So I mean, please don't quote me here. I'm just using two unpublished studies here, and one of them, the co-investigator is here with us. And from her qualitative insights, what she tells us is that when women choose to participate in the labor force, the enabling factor here is a negative phenomenon of financial distress that is there in the households, right? So that is driving women to join the the labor force. And then you see this, maybe like, I was just like thinking out loud here, women's expectations of like joining the labor force in terms of wages is very high. Is it because like the cost they associate with joining the labor force will be higher, right? So possibly that could be one reason, but yeah, that to explore. And then there's another study from the Sapiens lab that tells us that when women join the workforce and they are exposed to the similar kind of stress that a male is exposed to in that particular occupation, however, the health implication, the negative health implication is higher for women than it is for men, right? So then how do we take care of these concerns while we enable women to join the workforce? And what do these mean in the context of digital platforms and digitized world? How would these issues and concerns be assigned? So without taking much of your time, I think very interestingly, what we're looking forward is that post this inception meeting that we had, and multiple, I'm sure there will be series of like follow-up workshops, consultations that the team is going to hold. And by the end of it, the team is able to not just define and redefine the different definitions that we have touched here, but also, positively contribute to this big data gap that is there, and this evidence, the much needed evidence that we need in the context of digital platforms. And this will definitely help in not just designing products, but also products and services tailored specifically to the women in the context of digital platforms, but also, creating inclusive employment opportunities and workplaces. And, I'll also take this opportunity, so I'm doing an exercise of measuring the financial health of the gig workers, and specifically the women who work in platform economies. And this, my takeaway from here is income being a continuous source of income being a key contributor to positive financial health, right? So at some point, definitely we are going to see synergies between all the work that LEAD is doing on this, and the platform in itself is going to do, and contributing to richer set of evidence there.